Hi, everybody. I think I'm on. Am I on? Okay, I'm gonna trust that we're in a good place. Hi, everyone. I'm Malik Pancholi. I'm the co-founder of Act to Change. Thank you all for joining us for the second in our series of COVID Convos. We have over 1,150 RSVPs for today's event, which is more than we had for our first one, and we're so grateful to have all of you joining us today. So just a little housekeeping before we start. If you have general thoughts, feel free to use the chat feature on here. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature. We're going to be moderating those, and we'll be saving time for a Q&A towards the end of our conversation. Apologies in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. We'll do our best. Just for a little bit of background, we all know that the outbreak of COVID-19, the coronavirus, has brought with it some devastating consequences. There are now over, 2 million confirmed cases worldwide, and healthcare workers, like the ones that you just saw in that very moving video we just played, as well as first responders and essential workers, are protecting all of us while putting their own lives at risk. Another horrific part of this disease is that because the outbreak first started in China, it has wrongly brought with it an alarming number of hate crimes and incidences of bullying directed at the Asian American community. So we hope that our talk here today will open up discussions, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a student, a community member, on ways to rise above the bullying and the hate. Before we hop in, I just want to give you a little bit of background on Act to Change. So our mission here at Act to Change is very simple. It's to end bullying against Asian American and Pacific Islander youth, and to foster a world where all young people can celebrate their differences. Act to Change was first founded as a White House campaign in 2015. I was serving on President Barack Obama's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and myself and the staff at the White House Initiative on AAPIs were seeing that AAPI kids were being bullied at shocking rates, sometimes at double the national average, and also in very unique ways for their appearance, the languages they spoke, their English proficiency, for their accents, the foods they brought to school, their perceived immigration status, religion, and also intersectional reasons like being LGBTQ. And there was not a campaign speaking to these specific needs. Now, this was back in 2015, and we already needed a campaign like this. In 2017, as the administration turned over and we saw a rise in anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim sentiment, our work became even more important. So we moved the campaign outside of the White House and reformed it as a national nonprofit. And now in 2020, with the coronavirus, our work has sadly become more important again. So I went over some of these statistics last time, but I just wanna highlight a few of the cases that have been happening around the country. And we have a slide that also highlights some of these incidences. But an Asian teen in California was sent to the emergency room after he was bullied and assaulted and accused of having the coronavirus. A 23-year-old woman in New York City had to go to the hospital after she was punched in the face by attackers invoking anti-Asian slurs. A man sprayed an Asian passenger on the New York City subway with Febreze and verbally abused him. The FBI recently put out a report warning of a surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans. In their report, they included a story of a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old being stabbed. The suspect thought they were Chinese and that they were infecting others with the virus. We also have reports of Asian Americans not being allowed into stores, not being picked up by Ubers or Lyfts, being told not to come to work. There's been an alarming decrease in support for Asian American businesses, and the online reporting forum Stop AAPI Hate has received over 1,500 direct reports of discrimination against Asian Americans since it first opened on March 17th. Now, the Asian American community has been responding to this hate in some incredibly positive ways, as you can see on the slide we have up now. There was that video that we played for you that I thought would find so moving and so important. Basketball player Jeremy Lin has pledged $1 million to COVID relief efforts. And at Act to Change, we're doing our part here with these COVID convos. Now, on our first COVID convo, we spoke with Congresswoman Grace Meng, who gave us insights into legislation that she is pushing forward to stop naming the virus the Chinese virus. Dr. Vivek Murthy spoke about acts of service and kindness that we can all be doing every day. and actor Hudson Yang talked about the challenges of schooling online. So for this session, we at Act to Change thought about this. Young people spend a great deal of time in school and consuming media, watching TV, films, being online. So what happens when we're not included in these areas? And what can we be doing to ensure that our stories are being told in these areas and being told accurately? And how does that combat hate? So we have two amazing panelists, experts in both of these areas joining us today. We're very lucky to be joined by Sarah Ha. Hi, Sarah. Sarah is the VP of National Community Alliances at Teach for America. In her role, she drives the organization's external engagement strategy with national civil rights and aligned organizations, leading and working alongside a team of senior leaders who manage the Asian American and Pacific Islander Community Alliances, Black Community Alliances, the DACA Initiative, Latinx Community Alliances, LGBTQ+ Community Initiative, and Native Alliances. And as if that didn't keep her busy enough, she also just joined the Act to Change Advisory Council. Sarah. We also have actor, writer, and producer Randall Park. You all know him as the star of Fresh Off the Boat, the first broadcast comedy in over 20 years to feature an all Asian American cast. He's also the star of the hit film Always Be My Maybe, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Aquaman, the upcoming WandaVision, and True Story. And as if that weren't enough for him, he recently formed a production company called Imminent Collision that has a producing deal at 20th Century Fox, and they are dedicated to developing comedy-forward stories from Asian American perspectives for all audiences. So just to get us started here, I just listed off a number of these news stories, but I'd like to ask each of you how the coronavirus has directly impacted your own lives. And Sarah, maybe we could start with you. What's the greatest impact that you're feeling from the coronavirus being out there?
Thanks, Malik. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and for the opportunity to join this conversation. I'm extremely honored, and especially honored moving into my new capacity as an advisory council member for Act to Change. The coronavirus has significantly impacted me in my professional space, as many schools have closed, and my colleagues and I have been working exceptionally close to a number of our educators and teachers across the country to understand the emerging needs from our students and our families. But I will focus on talking about how it's personally impacted me, especially around this topic around racism and bullying. 2 weeks ago, my sister and I were walking back from running out to grab some groceries. On our way back, an older gentleman spat in our direction and called us effing chinks. It happened so quickly, we didn't have time to respond, but it triggered memories of being bullied when I was a child returning to the United States as an English language learner. Hearing the same phrase, effing chinks, go back to your own country. What I've learned in that moment was that trauma never leaves you, and those who are bullies also carry the pain too. And I acknowledge that, trying to lean into my trauma-informed perspective and trying to understand what would incent someone to say something so hurtful and inciting hate and bias towards me. Part of the reason why I feel particularly compelled to be a part of this conversation is that I felt compelled to be the advocate that my 9-year-old self needed at the time. We know that bullying can affect everyone, those who are bullied, those who bully, and those who witness bullying. It passes on until we stop it. And it shows up as adults in public office or in politics, and we have to stop it personally and systemically. And we know bullying can affect everyone in the ways in which it can harm the socio-emotional well-being of children and how that could translate into their development as adults. I've also been a part of a parent neighborhood Facebook group, and it alarmed me to come across a post from a parent talk about how during the time that school was still in session, he had children that was being accused of eating bats or other unclean foods and being told to stay away because they were Chinese and have the virus. And I actually live in Congresswoman Main's district. And what was alarming to me was thinking about how many other children across the country are internalizing the racism that they're experiencing and the impact that lack of belonging might have in their long-term development.
Thank you for sharing that story. First of all, I'm so sorry that was something that you had to endure, and there's so much stuff to unpack in there. I definitely want to talk a little bit more, and we can come back to this a little bit later about some of that childhood trauma and those experiences that stay with us. I also am just curious, like in that moment, what did you guys do? What did you and your sister do? And what did you feel like? How did you respond to it?
I think initially it didn't occur, like it didn't register for us until the man had walked swiftly past us. And then within minutes, I'd have to say I did experience rage and anger. And it made me reflect on like, what would I have said if I caught it earlier enough? But I'm also acknowledging the fact that like we would have had to assess our safety because we were walking alone. There was no one around us. But it's certainly been making me think about like what would be the teachable moment, like in the event that it happens again. What we immediately did when we returned home was to report it, to stop API hate and stand against hate, acknowledging that it's important to share and report out incidences of bias and hate so that we can educate the public and demonstrate to service providers where help is needed and strengthen the advocacy efforts to respond to and prevent hate crimes.
I just want to, just on top of that, I just want to say that we at acttochange.org, we have a list of a lot of the reporting mechanisms, including Stop AAPI Hate and Stand Against Hatred.org. And just to second what you're saying, it's so important that people report these incidences when they happen, because if we don't know they're happening, we can't respond to them. And I also just want to throw out, there are hotlines that you can call, and there's the FBI that you can report incidences to, but for people who don't trust the government or have a reason why they can't interact with the government on a certain level, a lot of the Asian American organizations are cognizant of that and will just collect the information and use it to drive change. So please report. Randall, I'd love to bring you into the conversation a little bit too. So I'm just curious, have you felt any direct impact around the coronavirus in your life?
Well, I mean, direct impact in the way that most people are experiencing right now, just being quarantined with the family and not going out much. I haven't had any, I've been lucky enough to not have any kind of direct racism thrown at me, but just hearing Sarah's story and hearing and seeing all the stories out there right now has definitely been a source of anxiety during this time, and that rage that Sarah talks about. It's like little bursts of rage every time I hear one of these stories and see one of these stories, and it's really upsetting and in a way not surprising too. I feel like whenever there's fear and uncertainty and out there, it's like there's always someone that they always, it feels like someone gets chosen to be the ones to pick on, and it's pretty distressing.
Yeah, so I want to kind of, Sarah, you brought up coming or being in the States as a child versus being an adult, and this trauma. And so I want to, you know, one thing that I'm very cognizant of as an actor is what's out there, what kind of messages are out there around our communities in the media and television, in education. Sarah, I want to talk to you about that. So Randall, you know, for example, having you as the lead on a sitcom that was beloved by so many for so many years, playing the romantic lead in a movie like Always Be My Maybe, to me, these things are very important for our communities. I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about, do you feel like that representation has an impact on young people and on the narratives around our communities? And what do you think that is? Did you feel like you had a responsibility to tell a certain story in those mediums?
Yeah, I think a part of the reason why I wanted to go into this business, and I'm finding this from a lot of my Asian American actor, writer friends, you know, they wanted to come into this business to kind of change the landscape of the industry because there wasn't enough representation for them at the time. And I think we're all aware of the importance of it in that it humanizes us, you know, as a people. Just telling these stories when people are watching a movie or a TV show, it's like the viewer puts themselves in the shoes of the people on the screen. They can see the world through their eyes, and I think that creates empathy. And if they have that connection to that person who looks different than them, they have this human kind of bond. And I think that hopefully will stick with them throughout their life, especially if they're children, you know, and they're impressionable and they love this character who just so happens to look different than them. And I think it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with someone at Asian Americans Advancing Justice years ago about how in certain communities in our country, the first time someone might come across another culture could be through a book or a television show or a movie or a piece of theater even. And so having that kind of representation can be a bridge to understanding someone else's culture. And like you said, humanizing someone who might look different than you or have an accent that might be different than yours or whatever, whatever that difference might be. Sarah, obviously, schools are no longer in session. And I would say that, you know, one thing about being in a school that might have a diverse student body is that you might actually come across other people and get to learn about their cultures. Now we're in these distinct sort of spaces where we're probably surrounded by people who are very similar to ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about the historic representation that our communities have had in schools and how that's looks different now with schooling from home and what we're doing to make it look better going forward? That's a lot, I know.
It's really a great question, Molly. I'd like to contextualize this by just acknowledging that nearly all racial groups in this country face this similar challenge, either as far as coverage of their complex community narratives or stereotyped coverage of their communities. And which is why I really appreciate the work that Randall, you have done to write in stories that do reflect the ability for someone like myself to see my story and what I'm exposed to on the screen. And we can all gain insights into like the true or real US history by learning the contributions of Black, Latinx, Native, Middle Eastern, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, LGBTQ, Muslim, undocumented, refugee, immigrant, and other underrepresented communities. And the power of that is the ability to see the many ways lives and experiences parallel and touch each other, yet we don't see enough of those stories that equip our rapidly growing diverse student population. So when it comes to our AAPI stories, for the most part, they continue to be invisible in our textbooks and curriculum across content areas. While Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders have been recognized for their successes, far and few are recognized as contributors to influential political, social, and equity movements or advancement of social justice. And as a result of this lack of visibility, what we often learn about our community is that it's monolithic, it's oftentimes East Asian centered, which erases the identities and experiences within our large diaspora, as diverse as representing the 48 different ethnic groups, over 300 spoken languages, varied socioeconomic statuses, and distinctions across immigration history, generational status, culture, and religion. And with the racialized rhetoric around COVID-19, it's so critical that educators understand the historical context and confront xenophobia from students and colleagues. And our current reality reminds us that we need to continuously disrupt and address issues of hate and bias. And to get ahead of the harmful discourse means making sure that it is brought into our classrooms. Now that we are in distant and remote learning, there is an opportunity to make that more accessible. There are a number of resources that I've seen across our educator networks that are being circulated. Some like those that are shared through Teaching Tolerance that have been really helpful, as well as educators like Liz Kleinrock. If you don't follow her, I'd recommend you follow her on Teach and Transform handle on Instagram. But all that to say, like I just want to reiterate how culture is central to learning, and it's extremely significant in terms of helping to further develop the social and emotional learning of a child and their ability to build empathy and connection to others who may not share identities with one another.
You brought up something in there about the teachers and the people who are putting these lessons into the hands of students. And I'm just going to share a personal story. I wrote a book that features a 12-year-old Indian American kid, and I just finished a book tour, and I'd be speaking to assemblies of 700 kids at schools all across the country, and I would be like, how many of you are reading a book with a lead Indian American character? And out of like 700, one hand would go up. And then when they tell me the book, there was like the teacher would be like, yeah, that's not actually an Indian American character. Like they don't even know. And at one of the schools, a group of librarians later on sent me a picture, and they said, because you were here, we now have a shelf in our library, and we're featuring South Asian writers and books with South Asian characters, and we're encouraging the kids to check it out. And it occurred to me that had there maybe been a South Asian teacher on staff, maybe that would have happened before I went to that school. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, do we have diversity among teachers? Do we have diversity among the people in schools who are setting curriculums?
Yeah, that's another great question. And that's actually the type of work that my team has been trying to tackle. Just some background at Teach for America, we work to find, develop, and support exceptional and diverse leaders so that they can transform education and expand opportunity for children starting in the classroom. The challenge that we see in our, with regards to representation and diversity in the teaching workforce is that 80% of our teaching workforce identify as white, which isn't proportional to the changing student demographic across our public K-12 system. And when it comes to representation among the AAPI community, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We recognize that we must build a leadership force that mirrors the diversity of our children in this country. In the US, as many of you may be familiar, the API community is one of the fastest growing racial groups. But while 6% of America's students identify as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, less than 2% of them are public school teachers, and less than 1% of them are school leaders who share that identity. Which is why I'm particularly proud that my organization has committed to resources with the inputs to recruit a more diversified teaching workforce. So we currently have 7% of our teachers who identify as ANHPI, and acknowledge that students who share identities with our API teachers can have an opportunity to connect and see mirrors of themselves in front of the classroom. And more broadly, all children can benefit from the assets of API leaders, and all students lose from limited interaction from leaders coming from diverse cultural backgrounds, which we know research shows help to foster increased intercultural understanding and empathy in an increasingly interconnected and global world.
It's definitely, it's really nice to hear that that's exactly the kind of work you guys are doing, and to build a more diverse teaching teacher landscape, and the people who are actually putting curriculums in the hands of students. So speaking of which, Randall, I think you and I both came to this industry as actors first, and I know that as an actor, you know, I've certainly had to do things that I was not thrilled about, and represented my community in a way that I wasn't always proud of. But you recently started a production company, which I think is a similar thing to working from the top down as opposed to the bottom up. So can you tell us a little bit about
I'd say more like the middle down.
The middle down.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to do that, and what you're hoping to accomplish with the production company?
Well, to take it even further back, when I was at UCLA, a group of friends and I started an Asian American theater company, and you know, we weren't seeing our stories represented out on TV or in the movies, so we started this theater company. We started telling our own stories, and it was just this magical, incredible time. And many years, over a decade later, you know, I pursued this acting career and kind of got to a point where I wanted to do what we did in college, but in the industry, in the real world. And two friends, Mike Galamko and Hugh Ho, who were members of that theater company in college, were also in the industry. One became a writer and one became a producer. And we decided to kind of get the band back together and try to do what we did in college and tell these stories to the world, and try to get TV shows made and movies made. And I forgot your question. Sorry.
You know, well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was a little bit of a leading question, but I guess, you know, as an actor, I always felt like I was fighting from the bottom up, you know, that I was sort of like, if I wanted to change something, I was going to have to like get the credibility to get my foot in the door, and then try to make the change happen and hope that someone was listening. But I imagine as a producer or someone who's trying to create content, that you're actually able to put content out that's more reflective of what you actually want. So I was just curious if that is your intent with this production company, and how you see that going, and what you hope to accomplish with it. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, the intent is to just tell more stories from different perspectives within the community, because we're all like well aware of the power of those stories. We talked about that earlier, and it's, you know, it's still an uphill battle though. You know, it's still an uphill battle because like when I say from the middle down, it's like there's still people that we have to convince to finance those stories and to distribute those stories out to the world. But for us, because we're so passionate about it, we have just an innate interest and investment in finding great talent out there and great material. For example, Malik Pancholi, you know, like like your book that you had mentioned earlier, The Best at It. This book was just so amazing. I mean, I cried reading it, and it's just such a beautiful story. And so it's stories like those, like we find them and we're like, oh, we're so passionate about getting this out into the world. And so that's our kind of goal, but it is, like I said, a constant battle still, just to and it's a long game. It's not like we can, oh, we love that book, let's make a TV show. It's, as it's getting it written, getting it pitched, getting it sold, getting a pilot made, getting that pilot to series. It's such a long process, but it is something that we're all so passionate about, that we're willing to put in that work and that time, because we know, number one, these are great stories that everyone can relate to, but that are also very specific and very representative of an individual experience and a specific community experience. And but we love that. We love that. So we want to do all we can to get these stories out.
Yeah, I didn't mean to bury the lead, by the way. Just for full disclosure, Randall and I are working together on adapting my book for television, which is amazing, and his company has been so supportive and incredible. I just didn't want to be self-promotional, but I do, but I do.
So great.
Thank you. But I do want to say, you said that it's an uphill battle. I'm curious, like, what is the pushback you get about putting more Asian American stories into mainstream media?
Well, I think that it's there's a culture, in the industry, and that culture has just kind of evolved over many years, and it's not it makes things difficult, particularly for people like us, because the thought was always like, oh, there can only be one. Like when we started acting, it's like, if you got cast in a show, you can bet there's not going to be another person like you in that cast, right? Because there will only be one in that cast. And I think that kind of way of thinking applies to shows on a network as well, or the amount of movies that can be put out, even though these are very different stories with very different voices and perspectives. So it's kind of like there's that extra step of having to educate people and to remind them that, oh no, these are not the same stories, these are different, and these are both worth telling. They're, it's okay to have two minorities in a cast. It's okay to have two, different perspectives. It's good. It's actually better. It's better for the show. It's better for the network to have a lot of different kind of perspectives, and so there's still that kind of level of convincing, but that goes across the board for every show. It's hard to make a show. It's hard to get a movie financed. It's so there's it's just that one extra level of having to convince people, that, and also because there has been such a lack of opportunity. It's like attaching a star, like a big name star. Well, how many stars has this industry created that look like us, like big box office stars? Like very few. And usually when you attach someone like Kevin Hart, that thing will get made. It really increases the chances. But when you have very few people who, at least in the industry, you can convince the industry that will be like an automatic audience, then there's that extra fight that you have to kind of, oh, well, this person is super talented. You may not know them, but they're going to be the next, right. That whole thing, which is, it makes it even more challenging. But for us, like, again, we love it. And we want to expose this talent to the world. So it's a passion thing for us.
Yeah, you said the thing about, if there's one person in the cast, then we definitely can't have another person, another minority even. And it reminded me of something that Sarah was talking about this idea that we have so many unique experiences within the diaspora, that we are not all one thing, and that's not represented in our curriculums, that we tend to focus on one piece of that. And I think that's been true in a different way, but in a similar way in Hollywood, that it's like, this is the minority story, and it will be played by either this person of this color or this person of this color, but not that we can have multiple minority stories represented
Yeah.
within one 6-person cast.
I mean, we're starting to see the change, which is good. You know, it's starting
Yeah.
to change right now, and I think that's great. But
I'm
one thing
curious,
that's
yeah,
interesting, well, is when Sarah, when you were talking earlier, I came to the realization that I had never in my life had an Asian teacher until college, which I just never, and I never thought of that. It was just that was my life, you know, in LA. And but I just realized that, which is so kind of mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I'm not
yes.
surprised to hear that. I was actually going to pose to the two of you, like how many teachers who shared your identity were in your lives and at what point in your lives.
Yeah.
Because I had a similar experience too. I didn't approach my first Asian American teacher until college.
Yeah.
Nor did I learn about the experiences of the Asian Americans in this country that I could relate to, that allowed me to develop a greater sense of agency until I was exposed to like ethnic studies programs and classes at my institution. And what a shame that is, to wait until college to be able to develop that sense of identity and sense of agency.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a fascinating question. I don't know if I ever had a teacher who was of South Asian descent. It's not coming to mind if I did. I hope I'm not offending any of my teachers if there was one, but it's fascinating. And you know, I'm so used to thinking of it from the entertainment perspective of not having role models in the media to look up to, but I didn't even think about that idea that in education, we need those same role models, especially, you know, I think classrooms and schools are places that as young people, we're often very vulnerable. And, you know, speaking of bullying, it's often where it happens. So what happens if if a teacher has no idea what you're going through?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that comes to mind in speaking about that is the idea of building allies. You know, Sarah, you cover this broad range of so many different alliances at TFA. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how our communities build allies and what the importance of that might be, especially around combating hate.
Yeah, I think that's just an incredible question. And it's been something that a lot of my friends and colleagues on my team have been thinking about, especially around the power of the makeup of our team and the unique opportunity to consider how we do our work with an intersectional framework and to show up in solidarity across lines of difference, and to acknowledge that we all, while our experiences are very unique to our respective communities, there are shared struggles that have been impacted by structural and systemic barriers facilitated by white supremacy. And when we talk about like allyship, thinking about allyship having to be a verb and something that centers action. And the importance of acknowledging the places where we as Asian Americans have an opportunity to be mindful and intentional about how we show up and interrogate issues like colorism or dismantling anti-Blackness in our own respective communities, or especially in light of this global pandemic, acknowledging the places where there is disproportionate impact that it's having on our Native and Indigenous communities, our undocumented immigrant, Latinx, and other marginalized communities, and how do we approach this unique place to show up for one another and acknowledge that like all of our experiences and our liberation is linked. When I think about coalition building, it makes me consider one of my favorite quotes from Aboriginal activist and educator Lila Watson, who once said, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together."
Wow. Wow.
That's great.
That's an incredible quote. Maybe we can share that. I don't know if someone's able to type that in the chat or something. I would love people to be able to walk away with that. That's so incredible to hear. This conversation has been so fascinating. A couple weeks ago when we did this, I left like this much time for audience Q&A, and I see that there are questions like flying in. So I want to just like switch focus and make sure I get to include some of the participants. So let me ask you guys some questions that are coming in. This one is specifically for Randall from Joe Bagtis, who says, have you ever used bullying and adversity to motivate you to do great work in entertainment? Can you think of a time that you were bullied or even just turned down for a role for being Asian and used that as an opportunity to further your success?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get, I don't know. I feel, I get motivated by that, you know, like it's like hearing Sarah's story earlier, seeing these things online. I get, yeah, that there's that step where I get full of rage, and I've kind of gotten to a place where I take that rage and I feel like, okay, I have to use that to fuel like me, because it reminds me that there is a purpose to what I want to do in life, and it's connected to all of these incidences happening with in the outside world and to me personally. And I've definitely experienced bullying as a kid growing up, and it's just like so many like instances and stories of things happening to me that that definitely has shaped my worldview and shaped my motivation in life, and in the industry coming up, when you know, when you and I have come up. I mean, you can't avoid that, you know, and it may not be overt or, you know, kind of direct like what we're seeing happening throughout the world right now, but it's just so systemic, and yeah, and it's infuriating, and but it's also for me motivating. I'm trying to think of like specific stories. There's just kind of so many, you know, that yeah, I can't think of a specific story right now, but just, you know, coming up in the business, you really can't avoid it. It's cultural, you know, it's like embedded in the culture of the industry, I feel like.
Yeah. You know, I remember one of my first TV jobs, I played a foreign exchange student from some nondescript, potentially South Asian country. And I had a turban on and I was eating these horrible foods. And not that a turban is offensive, but it was used as something that the other characters made fun of. And yeah. Something that I now do is I speak at universities and I play this clip and we break down like why it was racist and why it was wrong and what the industry was like. So I hear you like on all those things that I don't know what it looked like for you, but those things that were part of the system, like the systemically, it was, if you're the if you're the foreigner in the cast, you are there to be the butt of everybody else's jokes. And it's so demeaning on a personal level, but also, you know, everything that we're talking about these messages that go out in the world, it's also inviting other people to then make fun of people who look like you in their school environments or in their everyday lives. And it's so damaging that way. This is a question from Daniel Dow to both of you. what are some solutions to the harassment or bullying that Asian students will face when they go back to school? How should they cope? Do you have any ideas or tools on things that we could be doing now to prepare them for that?
Mm.
And Sarah, maybe, I mean, I can also, because when we spoke, I know that there's, you guys are sort of dealing with a very new environment, but I think one of the things that you had spoken to me about was educational inequity and how that will actually grow while we're apart. I don't know if that maybe is a good starting point into this question, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, this is making me think about like how we're navigating the current environment at the moment. There are currently like 55 million children currently outside of their school buildings, and education is it's going to be necessary for education to look different moving forward. And quite frankly, states, districts, and local schools need support now. The school closures are not only impacting students, teachers, and families, but have far-reaching economic and societal consequences. It's widening disparities, as you had just referenced, that already existed and are shedding light on various social and economic issues, including student debt, digital learning, food insecurity, homelessness, as well as access to childcare, healthcare, housing, internet, and disability services. And the impact is being much more severe for disadvantaged children and their families, causing interrupted learning, compromised nutrition, childcare problems, and consequent economic costs to families who cannot work. And even before this pandemic, an estimated 12 million school children had trouble completing their schoolwork because they lacked internet and broadband access at home. And then there are homes where families have one computing device that might be a phone, so they may not necessarily be able to access learning. So to answer that question, it's a little bit complicated because I don't necessarily know how that's going to transform with the changes that we're expected to see and that is called upon us to adapt to. But initially, I would recommend that adults, like educators, parents, continue to have open conversations with children so that they feel safe and brave and to be vulnerable about what they might be experiencing. With regards to the work that educators and school leaders will continue to do to create safe learning environments, again, that's gonna be transformed, but I don't necessarily think the spirit of it will shift that much more than what already exists in helping to facilitate ways that we're calling educators to disrupt and address incidences of bias and bullying, and also equip their students with the skills and the resources to also lean in and do that as in the event that they are bystanders.
Yeah. Randall, I would just toss it back to you too. And I know you're a parent, like with the increasing anti-Asian sentiment, do you have fears about your child going back to school and what that might be what that might look like in a more public environment versus a homeschooled environment?
My daughter goes to a very hippy dippy school that really pushes just kind of looking out for one another. And but you know, we're lucky. Her situation is very different from what's happening the majority of the time out there. So I don't worry about it for my daughter, but I do worry about it for a lot of other kids. And when you ask that question, what could be done, I think Sarah is right. It's really about that open conversation and at least spreading an awareness of it, and you know, making sure that kids know it's wrong. But I wouldn't know. I think it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's so kind of, there's just so much fear and anxiety, and kids are learning things from their parents, and you know, and it's a tough time. But I do think just that talking about it certainly does not hurt. You know, it definitely helps.
You know, I will just throw in there too that I think everything that we've been talking about today is hopefully movement towards that kind of systemic change that allows that. You know, I think having our stories in the media, getting a larger, getting more diversity in our teaching base and then in our curriculum. I think also just having a presence, like having, hopefully people who heard our conversation today will go share it with other people who will go share it with other people, and becoming educated, that's an issue. Like all of those things will hopefully create change over time. It feels very frustrating that there's not like an immediate, you know, on day one when schools go back, here's how we can make children safe. But sadly, I think that's why this work feels like it's so ongoing.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's one. I feel so bad. There's so many questions. Let me see if I can get one more in, because I want to be cognizant of everyone's time as well. This is an interesting one. This is from Alice Lee. It seems as if the model minority myth adds to the hate against Asians because other communities of color perceive that we don't deserve support during this rise of hate crimes, that our communities are okay. I think that's something that we all struggle with. Sarah, I think you talked about this a little bit, but I just want to open this up again. What can our community do to reach out to other communities to promote unity and solidarity?
It's a great question. I think it has a lot to do with education and raising awareness about the historical context of where the model minority myth had emerged from and how it was used as a political tool to divert attention away from the inequities and discrimination that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders were facing at the height of the civil rights era. In addition, as a tool to pit communities of color against one another, like tying in like much of what we were talking about earlier around the importance of sharing our stories, the importance of sharing counter narratives, so that we break away from the monolithic misperceptions that communities who may not be as well-versed or aware of the complex nuances of our community is going to be incredibly important to help reveal the inequities that do exist, and then at the same time acknowledge where the model minority myth has actually perpetuated anti-Blackness that further created that divide, and the continued work that we as a community also need to do to like interrogate that as well.
I think for us as a production company, one thing we're doing is a priority for us is to not only tell our stories, but to tell stories about that bridge communities, and to team up with other producers and writers of different communities to make sure we can tell these stories about different groups of people, different perspectives in one project. And hopefully, again, it's the long game of if we can get these projects on the air, then people can see through the eyes of these characters that these people can love each other, can be family with each other, can be friends with each other's and allies, and it just not be about separation. And yeah, I think that's important.
That's great. So in the interest of time, I have one last question for both of you at the very end, but I wanted to make sure that I get into everybody who's tuned in to join us today. I'm so sorry we did not get to all of your questions. We had over 50 questions submitted, but our team is going to do their best to follow up afterwards. We'll try to do a newsletter or written responses to questions. I also want to make sure that you all know that we have resources at acttochange.org/COVID-19. As I said before, we have a list of organizations that you can report incidences to. We also have a list of crisis prevention hotlines if you're in immediate danger or at the risk of suicide. We are compiling news stories that we encourage you to go read. There are a number of campaigns out there that you can participate in right now. Wash the Hate, Hate is a Virus, Racism is a Virus. Our friends at Asian Americans Advancing Justice and Holla Back are hosting weekly bystander intervention trainings through the end of May. We have info about that again at acttochange.org. One thing that we want to end every one of these COVID convos, and by the way, we will have another one of these and we will send you all info on it very soon, but we want to end every session with what we call the kindness table, a place where parents, teachers, and students can come together and do one thing today that is an act of kindness, because we at Act to Change believe that kindness is the antidote to hate. So I just want to put out to you, Randall and Sarah, if you could leave our audience with one thing that they can do today that is an act of kindness. And Sarah, we'll start with you.
It's hard to stick with one. So I'm going to quickly just share that I've been in the practice of sharing an affirmation of gratitude for somebody that I love, and also amplify or support local efforts to support essential workers, local business owners, and particularly groups working to support families that are not eligible for the stimulus check and relief fund due to their immigration status. So if you are aware of any micro funding opportunities or et cetera, please elevate them, support them. A plug for IMS schools, and I'll chat that into the group for the folks who are working to support undocumented students and families during this time.
Thank you for that. Randall?
That's a great way to end this, and just a great thing to think about. I think one thing that I like to do, and that I think it feels great, and I think it feels great for the other person, is to literally write a handwritten thank you note and to give it to somebody at the grocery store, working at the grocery store in these times, at the grocery store, the person delivering your mail, doctors, nurses, just people who are keeping things going, just to, especially if you see them regularly or somewhat regularly, just to write them something expressing gratitude and just something nice, and to hand it to them. I guess, I don't know if you could hand it to them in these times, maybe.
put it on a little conveyor belt at the grocery store, yeah, and let it slide down with your groceries.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful.
And then hand it to them.
Spray it. That's amazing.
Or if not, just tell them, just tell them. I'm 6 feet. I think that's a simple way to bring some positivity out there, and to let them know how essential they are, and to, yeah, just express that gratitude.
It's really beautiful. Mine's a little self-promotional. I'm just going to say it takes just a second to go to acttochange.org. You can take a pledge to stand up to bullying. And while it only takes a second, it changes your mindset. And it's such an important thing to do. If you're able to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, it's not just because we want followers, but it actually helps amplify the messaging. And we are a small nonprofit. So if you are able to make a donation, which you can do on our website, it's fully tax deductible, and it allows us to continue to do work like this. So I just want to say a big round of thank yous to everybody who participated today. I want to thank all the organizations that helped promote this. Angry Asian Man, Teach for America for live streaming the event. Everyone on my team who worked so hard to make this come together, I'm so grateful for. And thank you so much, Randall, for being here with us today and sharing such great insights. And thank you so much to you too, Sarah. Having both of you here is just so incredibly valuable. I'm geeking out on a personal level because I love you both so much, but I'm also, just with the number of questions that came in, I know how meaningful it was to everybody else. And I know I'm way over time, but I just want to end. 2 weeks ago, I ended this by sharing a quote from Governor Cuomo. I'm a New Yorker and he continues to inspire me. And I just wanted to close out with something that he said recently about New York. I'm not going to misquote him, so I'm going to leave in the word New York, but as I read this, in your own heads, please substitute the word America for New York. He said, New York loves all of you, Black and white and brown and Asian and short and tall and gay and straight. At the end of the day, my friends, even if it is a long day, and this is a long day, love wins always, and it will win again through this virus. So thank you all for joining us today. Together, we can put an end to bullying and hate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.